Central London. Hello, good morning. Welcome to the second in our series of Future Net Zero webinars working with AMP Clean Energy. Today, we've got a brilliant topic, a lighter than air topic, hydrogen. Hydrogen is seen by many, including our Prime Minister, as the next big thing. Is it though? Can it really help your business? How would you work around the pitfalls of hydrogen, the different kinds, its cost, its use, the environmental footprint? Is it really an answer for businesses? Well, we're going to discuss that today with two great experts. I've really bigged them up, so we're going to hope that that's going to happen. We've got Mark Tarry from AMP Clean Energy and Niall Stewart from Hutchison Associates. Gents, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Sumit.
Morning. Mark, do you want to just briefly tell people who you are and what AMP does, if they don't know, which they should do by now?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Tarry. I run the development business here at AMP. And by way of background and why is AMP relevant to this conversation? I guess in terms of what we do, we are a distributed energy business. So we develop, fund, and run energy assets.
And interest in hydrogen?
Well, in terms of hydrogen, I don't know if that's. I don't want to sort of preempt the slide, Summit. So maybe we should start the first slide. Otherwise, I'll be finished too soon.
We don't want that. And Neil.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I run a company called Hutchison Associates. We effectively do three things. We help companies like AMP Clean Energy track the huge amount of policy and regulatory change that there is in the energy sector right now, help them to understand and identify the risks and opportunities that presents for their business, and then help them to engage effectively with the policy process. Make sure that their ideas, evidence, their perspective as a company on the front line is actually ultimately reflected in policy.
But your background also is you are from the renewable sector as well, yeah?
Yes, I've worked in this area for about 15 years. Before setting up my own consultancy, I ran Scottish Renewables, the representative body for the sector in Scotland.
Brilliant. Okay, so ladies and gents, if you've not used the platform before, a little bit of housekeeping. You can ask a question at any time. We will be doing questions towards the end, but you can ask a question using the question tab. So to do that, feel free as the presentations go on. If you think there's something you'd like to ask, then please submit that. We'll be doing a little poll about sort of 3/4 of the way through where you'll just get to vote. So it's very easy. You'll get a couple of options on the screen, do that. And then at the end, we'd ask you to rate the webinar, give us some feedback. Hopefully you enjoyed it, but if there's anything you think we could improve on, we'd really like that. We'll be running this for about sort of 45, 50 minutes. We'll have time for plenty of questions, but remember, this is about you. So as our audience, just feel free to ask questions. If we run out of time, then I'm sure both gentlemen will be able to answer questions offline or through email. So we'll make sure of that. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mark to start the presentation. Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Sumit. Right. Slides up. Can everyone see the slides? Or
yes,
there we go.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Right. I guess just to extend the introduction, as I said at the beginning, we're a distributed energy business. And what we do is we develop, fund, and run energy assets. And I think our track record is relevant for hydrogen because we've developed a lot of on-site energy plant, and our vision, certainly in the short term, is that hydrogen it will be best made and generated on-site, close to where it can be used, where there is a use case. So as a developer, our job is to understand our customers, to understand what makes their circumstances unique, whether that is the fuel that they consume, their energy profile, or indeed their location, which increasingly is becoming very important. And ultimately, what we want to do is, by understanding those circumstances, develop projects which minimises the energy costs for our customers. And we very much develop projects with the intention of owning them long term. So we're a long term owner of assets. we're backed by an infrastructure fund, and assets. We fund our assets typically on balance sheet, and we enter into long-term energy supply agreements with our customers. But we're very much focused on long-term ownership, and I think that's key because we develop projects that are viable from the outset and can stand the test of time. And then finally, the importance of running our own projects is, we have a lot of moving parts typically in what we do in our projects, and to maximize the performance of the projects, which is crucial to us and to our customers, it's key, to maximize availability and efficiency. And we feel that the best way to do that is to run and operate our projects ourselves. So I think that's why it's really important that we work across the piece, both from the sort of concept stage, that blank piece of paper where people contemplate ideas, all the way through to actually making a project happening, owning it and running it, as I say, for the long term. And as a business, historically, we sort of have done two kinds of projects, two general sort of categories of projects. The first, which I guess has the greatest sort of look through to where we are on hydrogen. The slide might have, has it disappeared?
Is that all right?
There we go. Are we back on?
We're back on. Yeah, we're on slide 3. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Sim. Yeah, the first kind of project, which I guess has got the greatest sort of crossover into what we're going to talk about today in terms of on-site hydrogen production, is what we describe as our behind-the-meter business. So this is building on-site energy centres right next to, on an industrial site next to our customers, whereby we supply either steam or electricity embedded in a customer's operation. And clearly, that track record and that experience is going to be key to sort of the next stage of the hydrogen market. But we've also developed a lot in what we would describe as the in front of the meter space. So we have a large portfolio of assets that provide electricity during times of peak demand. So providing basically the grid with flexibility. And what we observe is that through time, I think customers can start to play a greater role in providing grid flexibility. And hydrogen, I think, will be a great opportunity to do that. So where you can basically flex your electricity consumption or your demand profile, either up or down, I think that will be increasingly valuable to National Grid. So the pictures you've got up on screen, I guess, are two examples of the sorts of scale of projects that we've done most recently. The picture on your left is Boonahaven, a whiskey. It's a 5.5 megawatt biomass boiler on the Isle of Islay. And you can see just the scale of that project. That is delivering steam into the distillery. And the second picture to your right is at Muntons, which is a malter, and they use a lot of heat. They've got an all-round heat demand, and they use steam for their process and for drying malt. So there you're looking at a 14 megawatt biomass boiler with a 3 megawatt CHP. And as I said, I guess the significance of these examples is that that they, I guess, underpin our track record of developing projects on site. And long term, we very much share a sort of a vision of 100% hydrogen grid. So the idea that the gas grid is ultimately replaced by hydrogen, we think that has that has to be the future. It's the way of enabling multiple buyers and sellers to transact and ultimately driving down hydrogen prices. But in the short term, given the challenges of blending and hydrogen injection into the network, I think there is a consensus that the way the hydrogen market evolves is very much around industrial clusters and on-site production. And I think that's, our experience is such that I think that's where we can really help customers, get involved in hydrogen right from the get-go. So there's, clearly, almost every day there's a headline on hydrogen at the moment, and there's a huge amount of policy. The government is very keen to stimulate action in the sector, and there's quite a lot to digest at the moment. So what I thought we'd do is we'd hand over to Neil to go through the sort of suite of policy and targets that are really sort of catalysing, stimulating action at the moment. So Neil, if I hand over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Hello again, everyone. So Mark's asked me to cover off the emerging policy framework to support the growth of hydrogen production. I want to split that into 3 areas. Talk a little bit around production targets, talk about the policies that are in place to support the growth of the sector that will hit those targets. And then thirdly, look a little bit at the potential route map to actually start using our existing gas grid to transport hydrogen in the future. Before I get into the detail though, I guess I want to make one overarching point, and that is that there's been a lot of talk of hydrogen for a long time, and at different times it's had more or less interest. But I think this time it all feels very real. There is very much a global interest in this. It's been driven by the largest multinational corporations and smaller, more innovative businesses. We see businesses coming into this area from their traditionally fossil fuel businesses, but we also see people coming from the other direction, from the renewable energy sector. And it's been driven by both business and also, as Sumit said at the very start, this has been driven from the very top of government. And all of that says to me that this time hydrogen is actually going to happen. And I think that's reinforced by the scale of the targets that have been set. So here we are in 2022. In just 3 years' time, UK government wants to see 1 gigawatt of production projects from electrolysis, i.e. using low carbon power to produce hydrogen from water by 2025. Then by 2030, the target is for 10 gigawatts of production, at least half of that to be electrolysis, and the rest likely to come from production from natural gas using carbon capture and storage. And just to give you a sense of what that means in terms of scale, 10 gigawatts of hydrogen production would produce, in energy terms, something like 1/6 of existing UK power consumption. So this is going to be a big industry. Separate to that UK target, Scottish Government has also set its own target for 2030, and that's for 5 gigawatts of production. So as I say, I get the sense this is really going to happen, and it's really going to happen at scale. Now, I think when people think about hydrogen, it starts to feel like a technology problem or technology question. But I actually think the challenges are as much around the economics and policy and regulatory frameworks as they are around anything terribly technical. Essentially, there are 2 key problems that have to be solved. The first is that production has to be low carbon. Otherwise, there's no point in doing this. That is the whole objective here. That immediately rules out the main form of hydrogen production today, which is splitting a hydrogen out from natural gas using steam methane reformation. And if we think about how we make hydrogen, there are 2 inputs. It's either gas or it's electricity. So by definition, using hydrogen for energy is going to be more expensive than the things that we're using it to replace. So unless there's some kind of policy intervention, this market just will not develop. And government's therefore done a huge amount of work over the last year or so to actually put the framework in place, the foundations in place that will create an incentive for people to invest in this area. The first thing they've done is actually start to define what we mean by low carbon hydrogen. They've set out proposals for an incentive framework, which takes the form of a contract for difference, which complex mechanism, but in summary, essentially offers producers of hydrogen a fixed price for their output, and that will allow them to sell hydrogen to consumers at the same cost as gas. They've also designed an allocation process, which will be used toward the first contracts for difference late this year or early next year. And assigned a budget of 100 million to that process so they can underwrite 250 megawatts of production. So a huge amount happened over the last year or so, and as I say, that really sets the foundation for the growth of the sector. But there are actually a couple of funding streams already open. The Net Zero Hydrogen Fund opened 2 streams a month or so ago. The first one of those is support for development of projects, and the second stream offers grants for capital support. As I said already, there's 100 million for 250 megawatts of production capacity, for contracts for difference, for 250 megawatts of production capacity opening probably next month. And then the intention is that there'll be annual rounds of allocation of contracts for production thereafter. And there's also going to be £100 million available from the Scottish Government for its Emerging Energy Technologies Fund, which they've allocated for renewable hydrogen rather than necessarily low carbon hydrogen. So I think the key message from all of that is there is significant funding available for businesses to actually start investing here. There is actually a kind of longer standing mechanism of support, and that's the road transport fuel obligation. So hydrogen from 100% biomass or 100% renewable power has been eligible for support through the RTFO. However, the rules are pretty restrictive, and that has meant that hydrogen actually represents something like less than 1% of total renewable fuels supplied in the UK today. Government has committed to publishing a new low carbon fuel strategy later this year, and I think we're hopeful that that will see a more pragmatic approach to supporting hydrogen in transport and actually align it with the low carbon hydrogen standard that I talked about earlier. And there's a few other restrictions coming into the transport sector which potentially drive people more towards hydrogen for transport, particularly for heavy transport. The final area I want to talk about is potentially the most significant, and that's the possibility of repurposing our existing gas networks to carry hydrogen in the future. Now, that would have a number of benefits, but I think the most important, the most fundamental, is that it would give all of us, whether in our homes or businesses, an incredibly accessible route to decarbonise, literally have a low carbon, zero carbon fuel piped into our homes and businesses and make it incredibly easy to move away from fossil fuels. Now, that's only going to happen in stages, clearly. So the first step, the first focus has been on blending of up to 20% hydrogen in the gas network. There's been a number of innovation projects looking at that, and that should give government the information they need on whether or not it's safe, it's practical, and can be done. And that should allow them to make a definitive decision next year on whether or not to actually start moving towards 20% blending in the gas distribution grid. In parallel, there's also been projects looking at using 100% hydrogen in the gas grid. And next year, we'll see the commissioning of a demonstration project in Fife, where 300 homes will move away from natural gas to use hydrogen for heating. Again, that should lay the foundations and give government the information they need to make a definitive decision in 2026 on whether or not we move to 100% hydrogen in the gas network. If we do that, then obviously we can't keep using the boilers and other equipment we have in our homes and businesses. So government's already looking, in order to get ready for that moment, already looking at requiring industrial boiler equipment and domestic boilers to be hydrogen ready from 2026. And we expect proposals on that later this year. And as I've said, a decision on 100% hydrogen in 2026. Now, I think that's important for the development of the hydrogen sector, but it's also important for progress towards net zero as a whole, because it really represents a fundamental fork in the road to the pathway to net zero. If we can use the gas grid to carry 100% hydrogen, then hydrogen is going to play a really significant role in decarbonisation and making net zero because of the accessibility that it would offer us all. if for whatever reason it's decided it's not safe, it's not practical, it's not economic, then electrification is going to have to do the bulk of the heavy lifting in terms of decarbonisation and progress to net zero. And hydrogen is going to have to be used in quite a targeted and focused way. Still significant, but very much focused on certain industrial processes and certain parts of transport. So 2026 a really important inflection point in how we meet our net zero targets. So just to wrap up, before I hand back to Mark, I guess just to sum up some of the key messages from what I've outlined, there's a huge amount happening here. This is a global phenomenon. There's global interest in hydrogen, and we have some really ambitious targets. Government has put in place the foundations to create a market here and put significant funding behind that in order to meet their targets. As such, hydrogen will play a key role in meeting net zero, and it's really only exactly how big and where that's yet to be decided. And with that, Mark, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Neil. Sumit, I believe we've got a poll question.
We do indeed.
Are you asking that, or am I?
I'll do it if you want.
Okay,
so let me
great.
just put it out there, ladies and gents. You should now see this poll. It says, which best describes how your business or organization is currently engaging with hydrogen? First one, actively planning, looking at hydrogen infrastructure. Second, interested in hydrogen-ready equipment. Third one, not sure, that lots of people are talking about it. So feel free to vote now. Let's leave that running. And I think do you want to carry on, or do you want to wait? What do you want to do?
Why don't we, well, there's only one more slide to come, so why don't we sort of conclude that, and then we can address the question or the answers after that.
Right. So vote now, ladies and gents. Very simple, 3 simple questions there. Which describes your business organization's attitude? Actively planning for hydrogen, interested in implementing hydrogen, or not sure? Please vote now. I'll hand back to you.
Okay, well, while everyone votes, I guess just a concluding slide. So why do we need hydrogen? I guess the simple answer is that it creates an opportunity to replace natural gas. But I think perhaps a more nuanced answer is one around storage. And specifically, if we look forward to a world where we have an abundance of electricity, so specifically, if we look at the forecast for wind, we are, forecasts which are consistent with net zero. We're going from 20 gigawatts of wind to in excess of 120 gigawatts of wind by 2050. And simply put, there will be times when there is too much electricity on the system, and we will need to take that electricity off the system and effectively store it. And hydrogen provides the means by which that electricity can be turned into something else and stored and used at a time when it's needed. So this is a sort of a favourite graph of mine, and it shows that by an average week in 2030, based on, as I say, a set of forecasts that are consistent with net zero. So if you look at day one, so if you look at the 1st of March, you can see that there is a mismatch between the generation profile, which is in green, and the black line, which is demand. So in the middle of the day, you've got a spike in generation, but that doesn't overlap with demand. And the trend is similar, albeit there are obviously variations each day. But effectively, what the graph at the bottom is saying is there will be times that there will be a mismatch, and we see that today. That pattern of mismatch will just become more acute as we get more intermittency on the system. So what does that mean in terms of the need for storage? If you look at the graph above in blue, where we have generation but no demand, there is a situation where you have to start to fill your stores. So batteries need to import, electrolyzers need to turn on, and we need to start making hydrogen. And then that flips to the stage where demand exceeds generation. So for example, in your evening peak, and at that stage, batteries need to discharge, and hydrogen needs to be converted into electricity, and obviously over and above, its use in heating applications. So this graph is basically interesting for a number of reasons. It sort of explains, I think, what sort of, I guess, we all sort of know is that there is going to be this need for storage. But what it really demonstrates is that there's going to be a need for a range of duration of storage. So it's not just about having a load of batteries, because it's really only economic to have 2 to 4 hour duration batteries, certainly at the moment. So the initial response, which is the sort of the darker blue bits of the graph, will be taken up by battery storage, but thereafter we're into sort of 8 hour storage and beyond. And really, hydrogen has the ability to play that role. In fact, hydrogen can play across the duration spectrum, so it can provide very short term sort of storage opportunities. Electrolyzers can ramp up pretty quickly, but obviously it can provide a long-term storage option as well. So I guess to wrap up, why do we need storage? We need storage, because we see a future where natural gas is displaced by hydrogen, but hydrogen, and more specifically hydrogen made via an electrolyzer, so turning electricity into hydrogen, provides a way of regulating a system that will become very top heavy in terms of intermittent generation in a net zero world. And that's why we think it's worth spending some time in this market, because of that role that it has to play. And I guess to conclude, before we come to the answers to the poll, as Neil said, there's a lot of action now. It feels real. There is a subsidy in the form of a CFD that we plan to participate this year. We know that historically the first auctions, the first round of subsidized projects are always the best. And we would, I guess, encourage anyone actively thinking about getting involved in hydrogen, whether you have an existing gas demand that you're looking to change, or whether you can combine an alternative fuel with hydrogen as a flexible demand side response product. We'd be delighted to talk to you, because now the opportunity is very interesting, and things are moving quite quickly. So without further ado, shall I hand back to you to go through the answers?
Absolutely. Let's have a look at the poll. So hopefully you should all be able to see that. Which best describes how your business or organization is currently engaging with hydrogen? 20% say actively planning, 25% interested in hydrogen-ready equipment, and 55%, I thought would be much higher, not sure, but lots of people are talking about this, so I feel I need to know more. Right, time for questions, ladies and gents. So if you'd like to ask your questions, start putting them through. A couple of people have said they've had some issues with connection. There's nothing wrong, so hopefully it might just be your internet connection, but hopefully everything is clear. We can always refer back to some of the slides. And remember, at the end of this, you'll be able to look at this presentation and the whole webinar replay on Future Net Zero if there's anything you've missed. Okay, let's just start with the first point, which is, Neil, you said something which I nearly spat my coffee out, okay? We're going to have a hydrogen gas grid, right? 100% gas grid. How realistic is that? In terms of two things that would instantly strike me. One, capacity to produce. Two, safety. Because if we look at businesses, and everything you've said is correct, and both of you have said it, that it nails it. If you can suddenly go, my gas is clean, then that really takes out a huge amount of decarbonisation problem for most businesses, let alone us domestically. But let's just talk about those two things. Safety first, because obviously in the past, I read this, I wasn't around, but apparently it used to be called town gas. So our natural gas in cities had some hydrogen, but it was all taken out after sort of North Sea gas was found. But if you're going to start putting it in, how will we be safe? And two, how realistically is it possible to produce the quantities of clean hydrogen we'd need for this?
So I think, just to be clear, Sumit, I think I said may have 100% hydrogen in the gas network. It comes down to what you just said. It will only happen if it's practical, feasible, economic, and safe. I mean, town gas was something like 50 to 60% hydrogen. There are still jurisdictions around the world that still use gas similar to manufactured gas similar to town gas, contains that kind of proportion of hydrogen. So that would suggest that it can be done safely, but that's why that's why we do small scale innovation demonstration projects first, to show that it can be done safely. In terms of the production of hydrogen, I guess it doesn't really matter which way you look. As we move away from fossil fuels, there's going to be challenges around how we produce all the energy we need. So whether that's investment in nuclear, whether it's investment in carbon capture and storage, whether it's a massive expansion of offshore wind, there is going to need to be significant investment in all forms of low carbon energy, whether we electrify our processes, whether we electrify our heating, or whether we look at things like hydrogen. Potentially, there is a greater inefficiency built into hydrogen because of the energy that's lost in conversion.
Yeah.
But equally, the point Mark makes is around if we don't use hydrogen, there's going to be an ever greater challenge to marry up the peaks and troughs in demand for energy, particularly power, and the production of that energy. So the whole series of trade-offs here, and I guess the exam question is hydrogen and is the use of the gas grid, does that produce the best set of trade-offs amongst all the options that we have?
Mark, is this a passive thing in a sense that my business wants to decarbonize? It's up to the government, the grid, and everything to produce that clean hydrogen, and then I just go, yes, I'll switch over to that. The way that people have moved to green energy supply for electricity because people have built the assets. Or is there something active we can do? And if that is the case, is it only for really large businesses who have the ability to electrolyze on site?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it has to be a passive thing. There is a minimum threshold for the CFD, which is 5 megawatts. And so in the first instance, it's, I think the first projects are going to be targeted on larger users that have a heat demand probably in excess of 5 megawatts. So I think there's a real opportunity to get involved now if you're an industrial customer that has a large heat demand, 5 megawatts in excess. In terms of how the market evolves and the gas network specifically, completely agree with all the points that Neil has made. We need to figure out technically how it's going to work. It needs to be safe, but I mean, just remember 15 years ago, there wasn't really much in the way of offshore wind, and it was talked about as a pretty challenging concept. Now we're talking about floating turbines in deep sea waters. And what I would say, and this is a sort of very commercial point, is if you're owner of a gas network, many of whom are sort of owned by private companies, you have an existential risk on your hands here, right? If you don't repurpose your networks to take hydrogen, then the clock is ticking. So, where there's a will, there's a way.
How keen he's in power still, Boris? So we know that. But how keen is he on hydrogen? Because it's one of those things. He likes big infrastructure, right? He likes nuclear. He's committed to that. He wants more wind, the Saudi Arabia of wind, and all of that. And he has, to be fair to him and his government, done a lot more in terms of pushing the hydrogen button. So in terms of policy and regulation for businesses out there, Neil, do you see this idea of incentivizing the market actually happening? So as it was with solar panels, feed-in tariffs and all that, do you see a way that the policy is set, hydrogen will happen, it's a goal that Boris and his government want, and let's be honest, most governments who will follow will continue to do so, but actually you can see what you mentioned there, incentives being made by regulation that make this market come to life? So
I think it's already happening, Sumit, and the first allocation process for contracts for difference will open up in a matter of weeks. So I think it's already happening. The targets that have been set, as I said already, they're ambitious, they're large scale. I think Boris is hugely enthusiastic. I get the sense government is enthusiastic, both at the highest political levels, but also also when you sit down with the more technically focused civil servants, because they understand that hydrogen offers something that's zero carbon at the point of use. It offers huge flexibility and at scale in the power system, and it offers a way to store energy, not just over minutes or hours in the way that battery storage can, but potentially over weeks or months, and actually solve what is one of the fundamental challenges to net zero, which is large scale and long duration storage.
Obviously, critics of hydrogen, and every time I do a podcast, and I quite like hydrogen, right? So my personal cars, I think it's part of the mix, but people always come back and go, it's just too dirty, it costs too much, the chemistry is difficult to make it clean, and most of it is a byproduct still, let's be honest, from the natural gas sector, oil and gas sector. How do you answer that, Neil, and how would, because that will be a legitimate concern for anyone thinking about investing in this?
So I think there are certain applications where hydrogen might be the only option. So there may be certain industrial processes where you need combustion, so you need a clean gas to combust, and hydrogen or a variant of hydrogen is probably the only option. I think it comes again back to the question, Sumit, about the gas grid. Over the next few years, we'll establish the knowledge. We develop processes potentially that make it safe, that make it practical, and if we can do that, then it will happen.
But is this investment in science? Because that's the killer thing, isn't it? The cost ratio of producing it clean at present is very, very high.
Well, again, that's a little bit of an unknown. But if you come back to Mark's point from a second ago, so if I remember when I was at Scottish Renewables Summit, and you were winning your Green Energy Award for your communication around the tidal energy sector, there were people saying to me then, offshore wind will never happen, Neil. It's too expensive. It's too difficult. Scottish Renewables should forget about it. Yet here we are talking about offshore wind as being the very backbone of our energy system. So when you start to do things, when you start to do them at scale, you can learn lessons and you can drive things significantly down the cost curve. The big challenge for hydrogen, as we just talked about, by definition, if your input is electricity or gas, then hydrogen will always be more expensive than those two energy options. But your point around, is it too expensive? Is it practical? So on. We're in the market. This is a relative question. It's whether or not, is hydrogen a better option than the alternatives? And that's maybe full stop in terms of the energy system, or is it a better option in particular uses such as heavy goods transport, such as some industrial processes, such
shipping,
as
things
power? And where it is the better option, then yes, we will use it.
Can I pick up just the point about price? So, and there was a question in the chat about this, about future pricing.
We're coming to questions in a second.
Yeah, but in a world where there's an abundance of electricity, and effectively during those periods, wind or solar sets the marginal price, prices go pretty low, right? Stroke they go negative. So anyone who can make hydrogen, i.e., take very cheap electricity and turn it into a gas that can be sold, the economics start to look quite interesting and quite favorable. So at the moment it's expensive, but that's because we're in a world where potentially we're paying 30p a kilowatt hour or more for electricity. Hence we need a CFD and the support for hydrogen to catalyze action, just like we needed a CFD and ROCs and so forth for wind. So in order to get projects going, we need a subsidy, but there is a version of the world where and particularly if National Grid are able to implement nodal pricing, whereby prices are different across the country based on the generation mix and generation type. It's not too much of a leap to think that actually hydrogen can stand up on its own 2 feet if electricity prices become cheap enough.
I mean, and that's a fair point. And as I said earlier, I think the government, looking at it, obviously Neil's the expert, but I feel the government will push levers to do this. But if you're in a business now, right, you've got an energy heat plant or something like that, what would you say to them, Mark, when people say, should I be engaging in hydrogen right now? We saw 55% of our people, okay, it's a small poll, but 55% said, I kind of want to know more, but is it really for me? With all of these things, again, if I was running a business, I'd say, maybe I'll wait and see. What would your answer be, Mark?
I'll answer that in a couple of ways, I guess. When we first started building energy centres on customer sites, it was all about outcompeting the price of, first of all, about outcompeting the price of oil, which was challenging, and then it became about outcompeting the price of gas, which was even more challenging. I think we had to be, become more and more creative about how we did things. Now the conversation has moved on immeasurably. It is not just about a like-for-like comparison with the cost of gas. Firstly, because the cost of gas is anywhere between 6 and 12p a kilowatt hour, depending on which day you're talking about. So people, the conversation has changed, as I say, immeasurably. Gas prices have become incredibly volatile. Whether they return to their long-run averages, who knows? But certainly out to 2026, prices are, 3-4p plus a kilowatt hour, and as I say, it almost changes weekly at the moment. So, the forward-looking market for gas is uncertain, and so people are interested in having conversations really about decarbonisation. Certain sectors are driven as much by decarbonisation as cost, and around energy security. And what hydrogen does is it gives you the ability to generate your gas substitute on site. So the first answer to your question is, should you be getting involved? Well, I think you should be asking those questions. You should be asking questions about, don't take a stable gas price for granted. And
that's for sure.
And we are seeing, and particularly if you're a listed business, there's a huge amount of investor pressure on companies to decarbonize. So you need to be thinking about this.
Could you see a future, in the short-term future, or actually, if you start to do it, if you have the ability, you could actually not only decarbonize, but you're making money out of this?
So this is where we see an opportunity is this idea of providing grid services over and above your consumption. So if you can be creative with your projects, and it does require some creativity, if you can be creative such that you generate sufficient hydrogen for your own consumption, but also have additional capacity to provide services to the networks for storage, for example, then I think that's where the conversation becomes interesting. And and that's where we've done a lot of our thinking, and where our experience of generating projects on site, and also the sort of in front of the meter flexibility angle. I think that's where it comes into the fore. But the second
thing to mention here, Sumit, is carbon pricing.
Yeah.
The government's currently consulting on changes to the UK emissions trading scheme, but it seems an inevitability that we're going to see a much more aggressive stepping down of the cap in emissions in the emissions trading standard. So the price of carbon is going to increase as a result. I guess one of the attractions for businesses here is that they can step outside of the emissions trading scheme by using a clean energy source, and they can fix their energy prices for 15 years because the contracts will be underpinned by government for 15 years at a fixed
rate. So strategically, you could say not only that the energy manager says this is a good idea, but the board could say, actually, financially, I can see this working because we've got that guarantee from government.
And I think the point Mark makes around the drive from consumers, we're seeing more and more drive for consumers for however badged, but more sustainable products.
Let's do a couple of questions that have come in. I think maybe this one's for you, Neil. Does the issue of the gas network being able to carry 100% hydrogen need to be answered positively before it's realistic to think about hydrogen HGV fleets, and accessing the fuel UK-wide?
So I think that would make it easier. I think it's going to be costly and expensive to transport hydrogen around by truck. I think what you could do in terms of an HGV refueling network is have a distributed production close to each refueling site, and maybe they would use different input sources. So in the south, maybe you use solar to power electrolysis. In the north, you're going to use wind power to power your electrolysis. So no, I don't think the gas network is essential to underpin a proper refueling fleet.
Okay, Mark, just checking, you're still there? Oh,
I'm still here.
okay. This one's probably for you. For long-term ownership of energy generating assets, how do AMP project future energy prices to feed into the decision making? I think you've touched on it, but that is an interesting one.
It's a very interesting one, and I won't pretend to have a crystal ball, but at a high level, we see two things essentially happening. We see average power prices declining as we build out more wind and solar, and that's because essentially wind and the sun is free. So it stands to reason that the average day-ahead prices come down. But what we see is a massive increase in peak prices and imbalance costs. So for the hours and the settlement periods where there is just not enough wind and not enough sun, what do you do? And who sets that marginal cost? The marginal cost is always set by the most competitive generator, and so that price has got to be equal to the cost, the megawatt hour cost of storage. It seems to me. So that is the cost of battery cell degradation or the cost of storing hydrogen. So in terms of absolute numbers, I wouldn't want to guess. But the general theme is average prices come down, and peak prices, where there's a mismatch between demand and generation, go up and become increasingly more volatile. And essentially, those prices are determined by the effectively the lowest cost of storage or generation, dispatchable generation.
Again, this is an interesting, I don't know, maybe for both of you, but this is something that we've covered a lot, which is where is the storage answer, right? And so every week on the Net Hero podcast, we talk about batteries because batteries are clearly there. But there are people who say that the hydrogen element of storage actually is a real big key player, that as you start to generate your own clean hydrogen, you use it when you need to. Obviously, you can sell some back, but you then got to store. You've got it stored in a safe way, obviously, let's hope so. But you've now got a storage sort of mechanism that is completely yours, clean to be used. How big a role in terms of storage dynamics does hydrogen possibly have to play?
So I think there's a lot of uncertainty there, Sumit, because of course one thing we haven't talked at all about today is energy demand.
Yeah, of course.
There will be an increasing focus on reducing demand for energy and reducing demand in certain places at certain times. So what role we need for storage is a little bit unclear, but as I said already, I think hydrogen, and this is a relative question, hydrogen has many benefits that other forms of storage just don't have. And if we can...
Such as?
Around being flexible, around scale, around the point Mark's made, around you can potentially use power. The scale of the growth of renewables, and also if we have significant investment in new nuclear, means on a windy night, we will have far more power being produced in this country than we actually need. And hydrogen gives you one way of actually taking that power, doing something useful with it, and storing it to use in the future, whether in coming hours, coming days, or even coming weeks or months. And the gas grid is probably the biggest storage mechanism we have in this country. So if we can use that to put hydrogen into, that is a very obvious and natural form of storage.
Don't know if this is well, this is what these webinars are about. And actually, it's a fair point. Someone said, this is probably for you, Mark, are you interested in partnering or funding innovative grant dual applications with micro companies? Because a lot of this stuff you can probably see, yeah, you guys are dealing with big people. Micro companies are the heart of, we're a micro company. What is the ability for someone like David, his company, to get involved in this, Mark?
I think in the first instance, and Neil, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the minimum threshold that's been set on the CFD means that I think, for this year, for the first round of the CFD auction, you're going to need to be 5 megawatts and above, and that's quite a big user of gas or energy. So I think the opportunities in the first instance for micro companies to participate, I think, are probably limited. Yeah. But again, if we fast forward to a world in 2030, 35 beyond, where the gas network is, increasingly, contains hydrogen. Clearly, at that point, everyone's having a discussion about changing their appliances to hydrogen-enabled appliances.
Another question here. Keep them coming, guys. We've got about another 5 minutes or so. So if there's any more questions you'd like to ask, then do so. It's quite a long one, but are we going to enable hydrogen markets to act like carbon markets? So hydrogen capture projects, uptake, etc., to future-proof new markets towards decarbonisation. What about the costing policy? At present, what is cheap is not green, and what is green is not cheap. Cost to leverage ratio for hydrogen as energy, how viable is it?
So I think we've already answered that in some of the discussion we've had, Sumit. A couple of points I want to make is there are already regular delegations to Scotland from other European countries looking at the potential to produce low carbon or renewable hydrogen in Scotland and actually ship it to Germany, Netherlands, Belgium. And that's something people have been talking to me about for a couple of years. So I think there is already definitely interest in creating that kind of international market and trading of hydrogen. That it's actually part of the reason why the rules around the use of hydrogen in transport today are so restrictive, is because hydrogen for use in transport can actually be traded within the European Union. Government has said they want to introduce a new certification scheme in 2025 for low carbon hydrogen produced in the UK. And again, the view is that means that people buying or selling low carbon hydrogen in the UK or from the UK know exactly what they're getting. And that's, again, one of the key steps to creating a market for hydrogen. And as we've already talked about, I made the point that by definition, hydrogen will be more expensive than its inputs.
Yeah.
But Mark makes a very important point. The value of electricity is going to be very different at different points in the year. And therefore, it may actually add real value to the economy to convert that into hydrogen for it to be used at a later date.
Yeah.
Can I just add one other point, because it's a bugbear of mine, and I know of yours, Neil, which is around FCLs. So FCLs are final consumption levies. So these are the levies applied to electricity to fund basically the CFD, the ROCs, and basically the renewable schemes that we've got. And that at the moment is a real barrier to this growth of this market, because if we have to build out more wind that is subsidized, and the subsidy increasingly is getting less, by definition the cost of electricity gets higher and higher and higher to the end consumer. So I think absolutely key to growing this market and to the next few years of the growth of hydrogen is that the FCLs are removed from the generation of hydrogen using electrolyzer. That's absolutely key. The point I would make about the growth of the market, I mean, international expansion, we see trade in ammonia, so the ability to generate and convert hydrogen to ammonia seems like a more realistic way of transporting hydrogen internationally, and probably a safer way of doing it as well. I come back to the whole idea of the gas network. Putting in the first instance, hydrogen is going to be made on site in industrial locations. The price will be determined by the buyer and the seller. That is basically the hydrogen maker and the hydrogen user. And so you will have a series of, every project will agree a different price based on those project specifics. Really what we want to have a national market, you want one common hydrogen price. And the only way that works is if you have a network that, as I said in the outset, that enables buyers and sellers, multiple buyers and sellers to transact. So I don't really see I don't really see a market where you've got local regional clusters compressing hydrogen and then shipping it around, because in part the cost of doing that and the safety. I think we need to be really focusing on how we repurpose our gas network to be able to do that.
Yeah. We're almost out of time, but one last quick point, which I spoke with Stuart yesterday on the webinar, and we had a good chat, me and him, and I basically said, and you know, the cost obviously is appalling in human life and tragedy, but I sort of said to him, do you think what's happened in Ukraine and the Russian invasion and all the things that have suddenly factored in this look at oil and gas, and you know, you've had John Kerry just yesterday saying we can't use this as a go back to oil and gas. What's happening with the Russian war and everything like that? Is there an element of one bit of positivity, and I'm putting aside the human tragedy of this, is that actually this might focus and allow markets like hydrogen to develop quicker, because now globally we can see the cost in human blood as well for oil and gas, let alone the environmental cost. Do you think there's any of that might actually start to make these markets move? Because in the end of the day, people are looking for alternatives.
So I think the answer to that is yes, Sumit, for two other reasons. One, cost. As the cost of business as usual goes up and up and up, it makes the relative costs of alternatives more attractive. And the second point is around energy security. Well, because of the potential for large-scale storage, hydrogen undoubtedly can play a part in increasing UK's energy security.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really add to that. I think it's all about energy security, and the events of the last 6 months have basically focused everyone's minds around energy security. And I think, you know, with offshore wind, you've got, you know, a great way of providing a certain amount of security, right? It's not windy all the time. The question is, how do you then fill in the gaps? And then how do you decarbonize your heat sector? And hydrogen seems like quite a clever way of doing both of those things, filling in the gaps and decarbonizing your heat sector.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you both for your time. I think hydrogen is not going to go away. I think we've covered a good introduction to it today. If you have any questions, ladies and gents, do send them in and we will pass them on to both Mark and to Neil. We've got the Big Zero show coming up on the 21st of June, and we'll be talking about hydrogen there. I think, Amp, you've got a stand there as well, so maybe we'll see you, Mark, but I'm not sure there'll be some of your team there. Neil, thank you so much for your insight. Please rate the webinar, ladies and gents. Tell us what you thought. And gents, if there are any questions, you're happy to take them offline, email, things like that, yes?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
excellent.
absolutely.
Brilliant. Thanks for your time today. You've made me feel lighter. I'm taking a lighter step in the future.
Thank you, Sumit.
Thank you.
All the best, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the webinar. Goodbye.